Welcome, dear listeners, to an extraordinary journey that transports us to 19th century England, where the destiny of a young orphan girl magically intertwines with that of a lonely duke. This is a story of love that blossoms where it's least expected, of dignity that emerges from the deepest ashes of sadness, and of how two wounded hearts can heal each other, transforming a cold matrimonial arrangement into something sublime, eternal, and truly transformative. Have you ever experienced that mysterious feeling that sometimes destiny writes the most beautiful romances, precisely when our soul is at its most unprotected and vulnerable? Where are you watching me from right now? Leave the city you're joining us from in the comments, because true love knows no geographical or temporal boundaries. And if this story touches your heart as deeply as it has touched mine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a lovely like. It helps me immensely to keep bringing these rare literary gems to you, week after week. Yorkshire, England, September 1823. A time of social transformations where the Georgian aristocracy was taking its last breaths before the Victorian era. The September rain beat persistently and melancholically against the stained, foggy panes of the old house in Yorkshire, where Eleanor Hartwell, having just turned 15, held in her trembling, pale hands the last letters her beloved parents had written before they departed forever. The cholera had arrived like a hungry, relentless shadow during that terrible summer of 1823, devouring precious lives in a matter of a few agonizing days. And now she was completely alone in the world, an orphan of both father and mother, with only a few fragmented memories preserved on yellowed paper and faded ink, as the sole tangible inheritance of a life that was once full of love and laughter. The sweet and nostalgic smell of dried roses still hung heavily in the stuffy air of her mother's room, mixed with the sharp, persistent aroma of rain that snuck in through the poorly sealed cracks of the old windows. Eleanor passed her pale, delicate fingers over the silk and cotton dresses that would never again embrace a beloved body, over the delicate pearl and gold jewelry that would never again happily shimmer under the golden light of a maternal smile. Everything would be sold unceremoniously. The somber men in dark jackets who came from the city to arrange the practical details of the family tragedy said coldly, as if they were reducing an entire life of love to mere commercial transactions. Lord Henry Fairfax, a distant and almost forgotten uncle of her deceased mother, appeared one rainy morning like an elegant, predatory crow in the midst of the thick mourning that enveloped the house. His words were as carefully measured as counted coins, his gestures calculated with mathematical precision, and when he looked at Eleanor with his cold steel-grey eyes, it was as if he were evaluating a valuable but inconvenient object that needed to be stored and maintained with the minimum possible expense and disturbance. "So you will come with us to Derbyshire immediately," he announced in a voice as dry as dead autumn leaves, without showing any human warmth or genuine compassion. "Lady Constance and I will do what is necessary for you, of course. It is our Christian duty, after all." Eleanor nodded in silent submission, the tears drying in her eyes like wells that have run dry. There was no choice. No alternatives, not even the illusion that her opinion mattered. At 15, she had already learned the hard lesson that the world didn't ask what we wanted. It simply happened around us like devastating storms that sweep away everything in their path, leaving only wreckage and broken memories. While she methodically packed her few remaining possessions into a worn and faded leather suitcase, Eleanor discovered a small book bound in red leather, hidden behind a drawer. It was a book of French poems her mother used to read to her during the long, cozy winter nights, when the fire crackled in the fireplace and the world outside seemed distant and harmless. She decided to carefully hide it among her most intimate clothes. It would be her precious secret, her silent form of resistance against a world that seemed determined to systematically erase any trace of who she really was beneath the circumstances that had been imposed. The black carriage that would take her away from everything she knew arrived on a grey, cold morning, its dark horses impatiently pawing the ground in the fine drizzle that fell like tears from the sky. Eleanor looked back one last time, engraving into her memory every detail of the house where she had known unconditional love, where she had been a cherished and protected daughter, where she had innocently dreamed of a golden future that now lay in smoking ruins at her feet. Now that future was just a dusty, uncertain road toward the complete unknown. But in the most secret depths of her young but already wounded heart, something persistently whispered that this was not the definitive end of her story. It was just the painful first chapter of something much bigger and more significant that was yet to come, waiting patiently in the mysterious folds of time. Fairfax House emerged majestically from the dense Derbyshire fog, like a grey stone giant that had been asleep for centuries, its pointed spires and Gothic threats piercing the grey sky like accusing fingers pointed at the heavens. Eleanor watched in silence from the carriage's foggy window, as dozens of dark windows stared back at her like the empty, soulless eyes of a dead face. There was no human warmth in that imposing place, only cold, calculated and intimidating grandeur, architected to impress and subdue rather than welcome and embrace. Lady Constance Fairfax received her in the sumptuous main hall with an artificial smile that never quite reached her ice-cold eyes. She was a tall, dangerously thin woman, always dressed in sober, depressing colours that sucked the life out of any environment, and who spoke with surgical precision, as if each word cost a small fortune and needed to be carefully saved. "You will sleep in the pink room on the 3rd floor, away from the main social areas," she said as her long fingers, adorned with expensive and ostentatious rings, nervously drummed on a glossy mahogany table, imported from abroad. "We sincerely hope you perfectly understand your delicate position here, dear child. We are your family now, out of Christian obligation, but that of course comes with certain, well-defined expectations and clearly established boundaries." Eleanor was led in silence through endless, oppressive corridors, obsessively decorated with somber portraits of long-dead ancestors who seemed to judge her severely in eternal silence, their painted eyes following her with palpable disapproval. The pink room was undeniably beautiful in its icy perfection, but it was as impersonal and empty as an elegant hotel suite frequented only by strangers. The imposing bed with an embroidered silk canopy, the curtains elaborately embroidered with golden threads, the floral wallpaper imported from France, everything was technically perfect. Everything was completely devoid of human soul or genuine warmth. During the first long and lonely months, Eleanor gradually learned the unwritten but inflexibly rigid rules of Fairfax House. She had to appear punctually for all formal meals, always impeccably dressed and behaved like a little aristocratic lady in training. She could stroll through the geometric gardens, but only during specific mornings and under discreet supervision. The afternoons were invariably reserved for delicate embroidery and rigorous piano lessons, always under the watchful eye of stern governesses who meticulously reported every movement, every word, every facial expression to Lady Constance in detailed daily reports. But it was in the immense and dusty library that Eleanor found her unexpected salvation and her secret form of resistance. Late at night, when the whole house was fast asleep and the corridors echoed only with the hypnotic ticking of ancient clocks, she would silently descend the cold marble stairs in bare feet and lose herself completely among dusty and forgotten volumes. There she discovered complex French treatises on classical literature, detailed Italian manuals full of romantic poetry that made her young heart sigh, and fascinating history books that told of extraordinary women who had changed the world through intelligence, courage, and fierce determination. "Knowledge is true power," she would murmur to herself in the silent hours before dawn, remembering with painful fondness the wise words of her mother. And night after lonely night, month after month that dragged on like an eternity, Eleanor systematically educated herself in secret, intellectually growing like a rare and determined flower, courageously growing in the deepest shadows. The years passed inexorably like melancholic seasons in a slow, repetitive dance. Eleanor gradually grew from a thin and frightened girl into a young woman of surprising beauty, her physical appearance slowly blossoming like delicate roses in May. But along with the outer beauty came something much more valuable and lasting, a silent but unshakable dignity, an inner strength of iron forged in the fire of adversity that neither the Fairfaxes nor all their subtle psychological tactics ever managed to break or even superficially scratch. Lord Henry gradually began to look at her in a completely different way over the months, no longer as an inconvenient burden to be tolerated, but as a potential investment that could yield substantial dividends if handled with intelligence and proper timing. And Eleanor, now having turned 20, and with a premature wisdom acquired through suffering, instinctively sensed that her life was about to change radically again, although she still didn't know exactly how or when that inevitable transformation would manifest itself. In the wild and majestic north of England, on the vast ancestral lands of Northumberland that stretched as far as the eye could see, Lord Charles Blackwood, Duke of Thornwick at 44, walked completely alone through the carefully cultivated gardens of his immense estate. He carried on his broad shoulders, which were hunched by the invisible weight of responsibility, the crushing burden of a ducal title inherited too prematurely, and immense responsibilities he had never consciously chosen, but had always fulfilled with silent dignity and an unshakable sense of duty that had been instilled in him since his earliest childhood. Thornwick Hall stretched magnificently before him, like a secular cathedral of stone and ambition, more than 200 elaborately decorated rooms, carefully housing centuries of family history, sacred traditions, whispered secrets and memories that weighed like molten lead on his tired soul. Charles knew intimately every ancient stone, every colored stained glass window, imported from European monasteries, every dark secret whispered through the echoing corridors during sleepless nights that multiplied like ghosts. It was simultaneously his most oppressive golden prison, his most inescapable sacred duty, and his loneliness crystallized into cold stone and impersonal mortar. His first marriage had been merely a convenient social arrangement, carefully negotiated by lawyers and completely devoid of any trace of genuine passion or even basic affection. Lady Evelyn Harrington had brought valuable political connections at court and a substantial dowry in properties and investments, but never true love or even basic companionship. For 5 endless years, they lived as polite but distant strangers under the same oppressive roof, fulfilling social obligations with theatrical precision until she unexpectedly departed due to mysterious fevers, leaving him a premature widower and completely without heirs to continue the ancestral lineage. Now 3 lonely years after Evelyn's sudden death, the social and family pressure for a new marriage was growing inexorably like persistent weeds after heavy rain. His legal and financial advisors constantly whispered in his ear about a sacred lineage, about the urgent need to ensure the ducal succession, about eligible young women from the high aristocracy who would be absolutely perfect for his specific dynastic purposes, as if they were discussing the purchase of prize-winning breeding mares. Charles sighed deeply, a sound that echoed like a mournful wind through the gardens, contemplatively observing the first brave stars that began to timidly appear in the deep violet sky of the autumnal evening. Since he was a small and imaginative child, he had always found true solace and genuine peace in silent astronomy. The stars did not lie with sweet words. They did not calculate social advantages. They did not demand anything beyond patient observation and silent admiration. In his private and sacred observatory, carefully built in an isolated tower of the mansion, specifically for his studies, he spent entire nights in lonely vigil, mapping ancient constellations and melancholically dreaming of the infinite and comforting vastness of the universe that stretched far beyond the small, earthly intrigues and ambitions. His strong hands, calloused by honest manual labor in the botanical gardens he personally cultivated as a passionate hobby, held the imported telescope with the reverent delicacy of someone caressing something absolutely sacred and irreplaceable. Charles had patiently transformed considerable parts of the ducal lands into innovative agricultural experiments, courageously introducing new species of medicinal and food plants that could substantially benefit the tenants who depended on his lands for survival. It was his personal and concrete way of leaving a useful and tangible legacy far beyond the empty titles and inherited properties he had not chosen. "Your Grace?" The respectful but insistent voice of the head butler, an elderly man who had served the family for over 40 years, reluctantly brought him back to immediate reality and its mundane problems. "Lord Henry Fairfax humbly requests a private audience. He says he has an extremely interesting and mutually beneficial business proposal to make to your Grace." Charles closed his tired blue eyes, feeling the weight of the world coming down on his shoulders again like a lead cloak. He knew exactly what specific type of business proposal inevitably awaited him. Another carefully arranged marriage, another innocent young woman, turned into a valuable chess piece in the great eternal game of the English aristocracy, another cold transaction disguised as a romantic union. "Tell him politely that I will receive him early tomorrow morning." After breakfast, he murmured with resignation, reluctantly returning to the telescope and the contemplation of the stars that never disappointed him. On that long and sleepless night, watching Jupiter emerge majestically between the scattered clouds, like an ancient jewel set in dark velvet, Charles had no idea that his solitary and carefully ordered life was about to change forever, in a completely unexpected way. That he would soon meet someone extraordinary, who would transform his empty and mechanical existence into something surprisingly full of meaning, purpose, and, a word he almost feared thinking, genuine happiness. The stars patiently guarded precious secrets that only time would reveal at its mysterious and inevitable pace. Spring of 1828 arrived in Derbyshire, laden with subtle but palpable changes that Eleanor perceived with the keen intuition of a young woman who had learned to read signs and atmospheres as a matter of emotional survival. There was an unusual and poorly disguised agitation in the normally silent house, furtive whispers that were abruptly cut off when she unexpectedly entered the rooms, speculative and calculating glances from Lady Constance that followed her like shadows, and mysterious visits from elegant and well-dressed men who closed themselves in secret conferences with Lord Henry in his private office, from which muffled voices emerged, discussing numbers, dowries, and mutual advantages. The devastating revelation came on a seemingly innocent morning in March, when the first brave flowers timidly blossomed in the still cold winter gardens, as if nature itself were celebrating secrets that Eleanor was still unaware of. Lady Constance entered the pink room with an expression that tried to look maternal, but failed completely, carrying on her arm a new, obviously expensive dress, sky blue silk the color of the spring sky, meticulously embroidered with hundreds of tiny pearls that captured and reflected the morning light like crystallized dewdrops. "Sit down immediately, Eleanor," she said in a voice that tried to sound maternal and affectionate, but couldn't completely hide a note of calculated triumph. "We have absolutely wonderful news to share with you, my dear girl." Eleanor deliberately remained standing by the cold window, silently watching the gardeners who were systematically pruning the rose bushes that were still dormant from winter. She instinctively sensed, with a cold certainty that settled in her stomach like an icy stone, that her life was about to be pruned as well, molded mercilessly according to the wills of others and needs that had nothing to do with her own feelings or desires. "Lord Charles Blackwood, Duke of Thornwick, has formally asked for your hand in marriage," Lady Constance announced, in a voice that sounded like someone offering a fabulous gift and expecting effusive gratitude in return. "It is an absolutely magnificent alliance, dear child. You will be a Duchess. Just think, Duchess of Thornwick. It's more than we ever dared to dream for you." The whole world seemed to stop spinning on an invisible axis. Eleanor felt the blood drain completely from her face, like water pouring out of a broken vase, leaving her as pale as a ghost. "I don't know him and have never seen him," she murmured in a voice that seemed to come from very far away, like an echo in a deep cave. "That is completely irrelevant, you dear fool," Lady Constance replied with poorly disguised impatience. "Love will come naturally with time and companionship. The wedding will be held in September, a date that has already been confirmed and announced. Until then, we will provide your complete trousseau and all the necessary lessons on proper ducal etiquette, domestic administration, and other essential knowledge for your new position in society." Eleanor stared fixedly at the sky-blue dress as if it were an elaborately embroidered shroud, especially for her living burial. She understood with the painful and sharp clarity that only a wounded youth can experience, that she had never been asked what she wanted, what she dreamed of, or what she felt. She was a valuable commodity being negotiated between powerful men. Nothing more than that. Nothing less than that. That night, in her last secret escape to the library that had been her sanctuary for so many years, Eleanor accidentally found a fascinating book on constellations and basic astronomy. She read with desperate thirst about stars that were dramatically born from the violent explosion of other stars, about how the catastrophic death of something old could generate new and brilliant life in distant and unimaginable places in the infinite universe. "Perhaps," she whispered to the yellowed pages that trembled in her hands, "this forced death of my freedom can also magically generate something beautiful and unexpected." During the following months that dragged on like an eternity, they systematically prepared her, as one prepares a virgin bride, for an elaborate ritual sacrifice, Endless classes on aristocratic etiquette, refined French spoken with a perfect accent, household management for large mansions, detailed history of the noble Blackwood family dating back centuries. Eleanor absorbed everything in stoic silence, secretly strengthening her mind and spirit for what was inevitably to come. The precious letters from her parents, carefully kept in a small polished wooden box that she kept hidden under the bed, became her sacred talisman and source of courage. At night, in the silent hours before dawn, she religiously read them by the flickering light of candles, desperately seeking courage and hope in the words of true love that her parents had exchanged during their own arranged marriage, which, by some inexplicable miracle, had gradually transformed into genuine and lasting love. "Let God's will be done," she murmured like a mantra, faithfully echoing the wise and resigned words of her deceased mother. September approached inexorably like an inevitable storm on the horizon. Eleanor looked at herself in the ornate mirror and saw a woman she couldn't completely recognize, undeniably beautiful, elegantly prepared, impeccably educated to be a perfect duchess. But in the most secret depths of her green eyes, the frightened orphan girl still timidly shone, holding on to secret and almost impossible hopes that her unknown future husband might turn out to be more gentle and understanding than cruel destiny had been with her so far. The wedding morning dawned enveloped in a golden and ethereal mist, as if nature itself were delicately hesitating about what was about to happen on that day that would change two lives forever. Eleanor put on her wedding dress with hands that trembled imperceptibly, pure white silk, like newly fallen snow, artistically adorned with polished pearls that had belonged to Lady Constance's aristocratic grandmother, an elaborate veil of Belgian lace that musically whispered at her slightest movement, creating a delicate symphony of fabric and hope. Before the ornate mirror, she watched with melancholic fascination the stranger who stared back at her, with green eyes full of uncertainty. 20 years of a carefully lived life, and she felt existentially as if she were about to be born again into a completely new world, definitively leaving behind the vulnerable orphan girl and courageously embracing an uncertain but possibly transformative destiny. The medieval church of St. Mary in Derbyshire was opulently decorated with perfumed white lilies and yellow roses that filled the air with a sweet and intoxicating fragrance. Elegantly dressed guests discreetly whispered among themselves, critically evaluating the inexperienced bride, excitedly speculating about the political and financial alliance between the Fairfax and Blackwood families, as if they were watching a particularly interesting theatrical play. Eleanor walked slowly down the central aisle, lined with red carpets, with measured steps that solemnly echoed like the beats of a racing heart, each one leading her inexorably closer to the ornate altar, where her unknown future waited patiently. It was exactly then that she finally saw him for the first time. Lord Charles Blackwood was definitely not the authoritarian, arrogant, and emotionally cold man she had imagined during months of anxiety. Tall and naturally elegant without ostentation, with abundant brown hair touched prematurely, but distinctively by silver at the temples. He had deep blue eyes like the ocean that watched her with something completely unexpected and comforting, genuine kindness mixed with respectful curiosity. When their gloved hands touched ceremoniously during the solemn exchange of sacred vows, Eleanor felt a strange and inexplicable electric current run through her fingers, like lightning in miniature. Charles held her with a comforting firmness, but without dominant possessiveness, like someone carefully holding something infinitely precious that can break with the slightest carelessness. "I promise to take care of you with all the respect and affection you deserve," he whispered, during the exchange of rings, words that were not part of the traditional ceremony. But that sprang spontaneously and genuinely from a heart that Eleanor still didn't understand. The 3-day journey to Thornwick Hall was a gradual revelation of personality. They travelled on winding roads that cut through rolling hills, covered in wild purple heather, and picturesque valleys where sheep grazed peacefully like white clouds fallen from the infinite blue sky. Charles proved to be a respectful and surprisingly engaging companion, starting natural conversations about historical landscapes and fascinating local history, never forcing an intimacy that didn't yet exist naturally. "Do you like to read, Lady Eleanor?" he asked on the second night, when they stopped at a cozy inn with a crackling fireplace. "Very much," Eleanor answered with simple honesty, genuinely surprised by the interest that seemed absolutely sincere in his voice. "Thornwick Hall has one of the largest and most complete private libraries in all of England," he said with evident pride. "It will be completely at your disposal whenever you wish." At that precise moment, Eleanor glimpsed the first genuine spark of true hope since she had found out about the arranged marriage. Perhaps her future was not just emotional survival, but intellectual discovery and possibly even happiness. When Thornwick Hall finally emerged majestically from the morning mist on the third day, like a castle from a fairy tale, Eleanor literally lost her breath with overwhelming amazement. The mansion stretched regally against the dramatic horizon, its medieval towers and imposing battlements outlined by the golden light of dawn that painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Immense and meticulously cared for gardens spread gracefully like elaborately embroidered carpets, and on top of a particularly interesting tower, she spotted something completely unusual and intriguing, a transparent glass dome that seemed to romantically embrace the infinite sky. "My private observatory," Charles explained gently, following her curious gaze with satisfaction. "I study astronomy during my free hours. It's been my personal passion since I was a child." Eleanor smiled for the first time since the wedding, a genuine smile that lit up her face like a sunrise. There was something genuinely magical and romantic in the idea of a powerful duke who quietly observed stars, of a man who controlled vast estates, but who found genuine enchantment in the infinite and comforting vastness of the cosmos. Perhaps, she thought hopefully as they crossed the elaborate wrought-iron gates, destiny wasn't as mercilessly cruel as she had feared during all those months of anxious anticipation. The first months at Thornwick Hall passed smoothly like a delicate symphony, full of silent discoveries and gradual revelations that surprised both of the newlyweds. Charles instinctively respected the invisible but clearly defined boundaries that Eleanor had erected protectively around her wounded heart, patiently allowing her to adapt to the new environment at the pace her soul needed for genuine healing. They naturally developed a delicate routine like the finest china, a peaceful shared breakfast in the luminous sunroom that looked directly onto the meticulously maintained gardens, where Charles read correspondence about estate business and Eleanor thoughtfully thumbed through fascinating books from the vast library. Lunches where they intelligently conversed about classical music, international literature, and the latest scientific news that regularly arrived from London and continental Europe. Eleanor gradually discovered that Charles was a man of multiple fascinating layers. During the day, he administered his extensive lands with a competence that impressed even the most experienced and cynical superintendents. He personally knew each of the tenants by name, knew details about their families, their specific needs, their hopes for the future. He was not a distant and arrogant lord, but a genuine protector of all who depended on him for survival. In the afternoon, she often found him working in the botanical gardens that he personally cultivated as a passionate hobby. His hands, strong and calloused by honest manual labor, handled rare and delicate plants with the trained delicacy of a true artist. He patiently explained about exotic species he had imported from India, careful experiments with grains that could better resist the harsh winters of the north, innovations that could substantially benefit local farmers. "Why do you dedicate so much time to this?" Eleanor asked one golden October afternoon, watching him kneeling reverently among seedlings of a particularly exotic plant. "Because we can genuinely make a difference," he replied without looking up from his careful work. "If I can help a family to have better harvests, if I can introduce something that will make their life a little less difficult and uncertain, then my existence has purpose beyond a mere title." Those sincere words touched something deep and responsive in Eleanor's gradually opening heart. Charles saw his ducal title not just as a privilege, but as a sacred responsibility toward others. The nights were reserved for pure magic. After formal dinner, Charles would gently lead her to the observatory, where the universe opened magnificently before them in an infinite splendor that took her breath away. He enthusiastically explained about ancient constellations, distant planets beyond imagination, fascinating theories about the formation of stars that were born and died in eternal cycles. Eleanor drank in every word carefully, as thirsty earth absorbs life-giving rain. "Have you ever thought," she said one clear night as they observed Saturn through the powerful telescope, "that maybe we are not so different from the stars? Sometimes we need to go through enormous pressures to finally shine." Charles looked at her with genuine surprise and growing admiration. "You have an extraordinarily perceptive mind, Eleanor. I had never thought of it that way, so poetically." It was exactly on that night that the first invisible threads began to carefully weave the delicate web that would gradually unite their lonely hearts. It was not yet love in its full form. It was something perhaps more precious. It was the mutual recognition of souls that perfectly complemented each other. During a violent November storm, when winds howled ferociously around the mansion like restless spirits, Eleanor found unprecedented courage to show Charles the precious letters from her parents. With a trembling but determined voice, she told him about the devastating loss, about the difficult years at Fairfax House, about her secret fears that haunted her nights. Charles listened in complete silence, his blue eyes filled with a genuine compassion that Eleanor had never experienced before. When she finished her painful story, he held her delicate hands with infinite tenderness. "You are no longer alone in the world," he whispered with absolute conviction, "and I solemnly promise that you never will be again." In that precious moment, to the sound of the rain beating against the windows like nature's percussion, two profoundly lonely souls found healing shelter in each other, beginning a process of mutual discovery that would transform both their lives forever. January arrived laden with heavy snow and icy winds that transformed Thornwick Hall into a crystalline palace of supernatural beauty. Eleanor discovered that the savage winter in the north of England possessed a wild beauty that literally took her breath away. Endless hills covered in white stretching as far as the eye could see, trees sculpted by the ice like works of art, created by nature herself in her most artistic mood. It was during one of those glacial nights, when the bitter cold forced greater physical proximity between them, that the definitive transformation of their relationship happened. Charles had carefully lit a crackling fireplace in the observatory, creating a warm and cozy refuge among scientific telescopes and ancient stellar maps that decorated the walls. "Eleanor," he began in a hesitant voice, like a man preparing to leap across an unknown abyss, "I need to tell you something important that has constantly occupied my mind." She lifted her green eyes from the book she was pretending to read, her heart racing without apparent reason in a quickening rhythm. "When I originally accepted our arranged marriage, I only thought of fulfilling a social duty," he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I never imagined—" He paused dramatically, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of nervousness that she had learned to recognize. "I never imagined that I could genuinely fall in love again after Evelyn's death." The powerful word, fall in love, hovered in the air between them like a shooting star. Beautiful, intense, laden with infinite possibilities that neither had dared to consider. "Charles," Eleanor murmured softly, his name leaving her lips like a whispered prayer. "You brought light where there were only oppressive shadows," he continued passionately, moving closer until she could feel the warmth of his body. "You brought genuine laughter where there was only deadly silence. You brought true hope where I had completely given up on dreaming." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes like fire. "Me too," she confessed in a voice as shaky as a delicate butterfly's wing. "I also fell deeply in love with you." When he finally kissed her, it was as if all the stars in the infinite universe had decided to dance simultaneously in celebration. Gentle but passionate, reverent but eager, full of a passion that had grown slowly like a rare plant cultivated with infinite patience and devoted care. "My dear Eleanor," he whispered against her soft lips, "my beloved wife, my chosen companion, my guiding star." On that magical night, under the glass dome where the cosmos blessed them with starlight, they ceased to be two strangers united by social convenience and became a single passionate soul, inhabiting two bodies that belonged together. The coldly arranged marriage had transformed into the truest love either of them had ever dared to dream of, even in their wildest imagination. When they finally separated reluctantly, Eleanor smiled with a happiness that radiated from the very center of her being, like the sun emerging after a storm. "I think I finally understand why the stars shine so brilliantly," she said softly, with a wisdom beyond her years. "Why?" Charles asked, completely enchanted by the poetic wisdom that constantly surprised him in her. because they found other stars to love unconditionally. He laughed heartily, a rich and warm sound that echoed through the observatory like music. Then we are a perfect constellation, you and I. The most beautiful of all, Eleanor agreed confidently, snuggling into his strong arms while the snow continued to fall gracefully outside, protecting them from the world and blessing the birth of their eternal and transformative love. The traditional Thornwick Hall winter ball was absolutely legendary throughout the refined English aristocracy. For 3 consecutive generations, the Dukes of Thornwick had ceremoniously opened their ornate doors to the absolute elite of the kingdom, transforming the mansion into a setting of impossible dreams for an absolutely magical night that would be remembered for generations. For Eleanor, it would be her official presentation as Duchess to society. For intensive weeks, preparations buzzed through the property like bees in an incredibly active hive. Exotic floral arrangements arrived daily from London in special carriages. Rare and precious wines were carefully brought from the ancient cellars, and talented musicians rehearsed tirelessly romantic waltzes that would make hearts sigh with longing. "I'm genuinely nervous," Eleanor confessed while her new experienced lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Harrison, meticulously adjusted the dress she would wear, emerald green velvet that hugged her figure like a perfectly fitted second skin, artistically embroidered with golden threads that captured and reflected the light like tiny dancing stars. "Oh, you don't need to be nervous at all," Charles reassured her, appearing at the bedroom door elegantly dressed in a black frock coat that effortlessly accentuated his natural elegance. "You were born for this, Eleanor. You're a natural duchess." The precious Blackwood family emeralds, an elaborate necklace, matching earrings, and a delicate tiara that had belonged to generations of distinguished duchesses completed the stunning look. Eleanor looked at herself in the ornate mirror and saw a woman who had learned to carry herself with a truly royal dignity, but who carefully guarded in the depths of her green eyes the eternal sweetness of the girl who once cried alone and afraid in Yorkshire. The first guests arrived grandly as the sun set dramatically, painting the sky in brilliant gold and deep purple that magnificently reflected in the mansion's windows. Elaborate carriages followed one another along the winding paths of Thornwick Hall like a magical procession of aristocratic fairies. Powerful dukes, wealthy marquises, influential earls, all the delicate flower of the English aristocracy came curiously to personally meet the new Duchess of Thornwick, about whom rumours had been circulating. Eleanor graciously received them in the magnificent Great Hall, beside a proud Charles, smiling genuinely as she accepted elaborate compliments and discreet but thorough evaluations. She knew intuitively that she was being carefully measured, critically weighed and silently judged by people who lived exclusively on social appearances and rigid conventions. The professional orchestra began the first romantic waltz, and Charles graciously offered her his hand with the reverence of a true medieval knight. "May I have this dance, Your Grace?" he asked formally, but with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes that only she knew how to interpret perfectly. "It would be an immense honor, Your Grace," she replied in the same formal tone, but feeling delicate butterflies joyfully dancing in her stomach. When he gently took her in his arms in the center of the enormous hall, the whole world disappeared completely. There was only the two of them, moving in perfect harmony while hundreds of elegantly dressed people watched them with fascination. Eleanor felt herself literally floating, as if she were finally where she should have been since birth. "Je t'aime passionnément," Charles whispered romantically in her ear during a particularly elegant and graceful turn. "I love you deeply too," she replied in absolutely perfect French, completely surprising him. He almost stumbled with surprise. "You speak French fluently?" Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "There are many fascinating things about me that you haven't discovered yet, my beloved husband." "Then I'll have the pleasure of a lifetime making wonderful discoveries," he murmured passionately, spinning her in an elegant turn that drew admiring murmurs from the impressed spectators. The night continued like an absolutely enchanted dream. Eleanor danced gracefully with elderly lords, who complimented her with old-fashioned gallantry, conversed intelligently with high society ladies who desperately tried to decipher her secrets, and received gradual silent approval from the aristocracy, who finally accepted her as one of their own. Truly. But the most special moment was when Charles gently led her to the balcony to get some fresh air, away from the suffocating heat of the crowded halls. "You were absolutely perfect tonight," he said earnestly, kissing her delicate gloved hands. "Absolutely magnificent in every way. I learned from the very best possible teacher," Eleanor replied lovingly, looking at him with a love that no longer needed to be hidden or disguised. Inside, the party continued vibrantly until glorious dawn, but Eleanor knew that the true celebration was exactly there, in that intimate moment under the twinkling stars, beside the extraordinary man who had transformed her life into an absolutely real and lasting fairy tale. March brought the first genuine signs of spring arriving, and with it an absolutely delightful surprise that made Eleanor's heart leap like a bird in complete freedom. Charles had secretly planned a special romantic trip, not to distant and exotic foreign lands, but to Blackwood Lodge, a smaller and more intimate ancestral family property, gracefully hidden among the stunning lakes of Cumberland that reflected the sky like perfect mirrors. "I want you to get to know my most precious secret, refuge," he said gently as the comfortable carriage meandered along narrow roads lined with wild daffodils that joyfully announced the arrival of the new season of rebirth and renewal. Blackwood Lodge was absolutely everything that Thornwick Hall was not: small but charming, cozy rather than intimidating, built of local stone that shone golden under the morning sun like liquid gold. Surrounded by informal gardens where flowers grew in a completely wild profusion, the house seemed to literally embrace its inhabitants affectionately rather than impress them with grandeur. "It's absolutely perfect," Eleanor sighed with genuine delight, completely enchanted with the view of the lakes that stretched like perfect blue mirrors between gentle hills that rolled softly toward the horizon. There, far from the strict ducal protocols and heavy administrative responsibilities, Charles and Eleanor discovered a completely new and liberating intimacy. They walked through the informal gardens with intertwined hands, had romantic picnics by the peaceful lake, and talked for hours about dreams and hopes, without any worry about rigid schedules or formal etiquette. It was during one of these intimate conversations that Eleanor revealed another of her carefully guarded secrets for years. "May I confess something important?" she asked on a golden and warm afternoon, as they rested under a magnificently flowering tree. "Anything, my beloved," Charles replied tenderly, affectionately playing with a lock of her silk-like hair. "In addition to fluent French, I also speak conversational Italian, and I'm secretly learning German on my own through books." Charles sat up abruptly, looking at her with genuine astonishment and admiration. "How did you manage that? When did you find the time?" Eleanor blushed delicately. "During those lonely years at Fairfax House. The nights were long and solitary, so I systematically studied in secret. There were so many books in the vast library, and I thought that maybe one day this knowledge could be useful somehow." "Useful?" Charles repeated, absolutely amazed. "Eleanor, you are genuinely extraordinary. Most aristocratic ladies can barely read English properly, and you have completely mastered 3 languages in secret." "Knowledge is genuine power," she murmured thoughtfully, faithfully repeating the wise words of her beloved mother. "Even when we don't have control over our difficult circumstances, we can always control what we learn and how we grow." Charles kissed her with a passion that completely surprised her, laden with profound admiration and growing love that overwhelmed him. "My brilliant Eleanor, you never cease to surprise me absolutely." On that romantic night, during a dramatic March storm that made the small house gently tremble, they finally consummated their marriage, not only physically but spiritually in every sense. They became truly husband and wife in all possible ways, discovering passions that they didn't know could exist, surrendering to each other with total abandon and complete trust. When Eleanor fell peacefully asleep in Charles's strong arms, listening to his soft and rhythmic breathing and the musical drumming of the rain on the cozy roof, she understood with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in the majestic stones of impressive Thornwick Hall, but in the devoted heart of the man who loved her completely and unconditionally. "Forever and always," she whispered softly against his warm chest, and Charles, even while sleeping deeply, instinctively held her tighter, as if their hearts had learned to communicate intimately, even in the peaceful silence of shared dreams. The magnificent ball of the Dukes of Westminster, in May of 1829, was considered the most important social event of the entire London season. Eleanor and Charles attended, dressed magnificently, she in golden silk that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers like a liquid sunbeam. He impeccably dressed in a navy blue frock coat that perfectly highlighted his deep blue eyes like the ocean. London was buzzing with intense speculation about the recently married Blackwoods. Some whispered that the arranged marriage had resulted in a surprisingly happy and genuine union. Others, more cynical, suggested that it was just a well-rehearsed theatrical performance for public consumption. The truth revealed itself in a way that absolutely shocked all the high society present. During the elaborate formal dinner, Charles solemnly stood up to make an important toast. The enormous Westminster Hall went completely silent, hundreds of curious eyes turning to the Duke of Thornwick with anticipation. "My lords and distinguished ladies," he began in a clear voice that carried authority to the most distant corners of the vast hall. "Today I publicly announce an important decision that I have made after very careful and thorough reflection." Eleanor looked at him with genuine surprise. She had not been consulted about any speech of this nature. "I have decided to legally transfer half of all my substantial properties to my beloved wife, Eleanor, Duchess of Thornwick. She will have complete veto power over all important administrative and financial decisions, in addition to total independence to manage her own lands according to her judgment." An absolutely deadly silence fell over the hall like a heavy blanket. It was possible to distinctly hear the collective heartbeat of the shocked English aristocracy. Such an act was absolutely revolutionary, completely contrary to all the ancient patriarchal traditions of the strict era. Husbands simply did not share real power with wives under any circumstances. Properties were definitely not transferred to women while the man lived healthy. It was something completely unprecedented, absolutely scandalous, utterly unthinkable in their society. "Charles?" Eleanor whispered with shock, completely stunned. "What exactly have you done?" "What I should have done from the start," he replied in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I have publicly recognized that my wife is my equal in all important matters, that I trust her completely and without reservation, that our marriage is a true partnership, not a traditional female submission to masculine patriarchal authority." Scandalized murmurs ran through the hall like waves in a severely disturbed lake. Some ladies fanned themselves dramatically, as if they were about to faint from shock. Some lords frowned deeply, clearly disapproving of such a revolutionary break of sacred protocol. But Eleanor noticed something else significant in the eyes of the people present: nascent respect, silent admiration for a man who had placed genuine love above restrictive social conventions. "Have you gone completely mad?" asked Lord Westminster when Charles returned to the table. "On the contrary," he replied calmly with confidence, "I have finally regained my complete sanity." The trip back to Thornwick Hall was silent, but not uncomfortably so. Eleanor thoughtfully processed the extraordinary magnitude of her devoted husband's gesture, understanding that he had willingly sacrificed important social approval for his sincere love for her. "Why exactly did you do that?" she asked finally, when they crossed the elaborate iron gates of the family property. Charles deliberately stopped the carriage and gently took her hands. "Because you genuinely deserve to be free. Because you deserve to have real power over your own life completely. Because our union should be based on mutual equality, not on traditional possession." Tears ran freely down Eleanor's face like rain. "But the social scandal—" "To hell with the scandal completely," he said firmly with conviction. "To hell with all of them, absolutely. You are infinitely more important than the opinion of all of London combined." On that passionate night, as they made love with renewed intensity and overwhelming gratitude, Eleanor understood profoundly that she had married not only a powerful duke, but a truly extraordinary man, completely willing to challenge the entire traditional world for genuine love and profound respect. The golden autumn of 1829 brought with it the sweetest of all possible discoveries. Eleanor, who had noticed subtle but significant changes in her body, confirmed with the family's trusted doctor what her maternal heart already suspected with growing excitement. She was expecting a precious child. The wonderful news transformed Charles into a version of himself, overflowing with explosive joy and intense protective anxiety. He immediately cancelled all planned trips, promptly dismissed less important social engagements, and dedicated himself completely to ensuring that Eleanor had the most cared-for and serene pregnancy humanly possible. "You are treating me as if I—" were made of fragile crystal. Eleanor protested on a beautiful golden morning in October, when Charles determinedly insisted on carrying her up the stairs instead of letting her walk safely on her own. "You are carrying our precious son," he replied with a genuine reverence that made her heart literally melt. "He is the most precious treasure we have ever held together." During the following magical months, Charles revealed himself to be a completely devoted and attentive future father. He obsessively read modern treatises on infant care, repeatedly consulted distinguished London doctors about the best current practices, and even began to personally prepare the baby's upcoming room, carefully choosing soft colors and delicate furniture, specifically designed for comfort. Eleanor watched him daily with an exponentially growing love. The powerful man who administered thousands of vast acres and hundreds of employees, now earnestly worried about finding the softest wool blankets, the sweetest melodious lullabies, the safest toys available for his expected heir. The pregnancy passed serenely like a peaceful lake on a perfectly calm morning. Eleanor felt genuinely radiant, blossoming like a magnificent garden in an eternal spring. She continued to competently administer her substantial properties, now formally hers completely, thanks to Charles's revolutionary gesture, definitively proving that women could be simultaneously both devoted mothers and competent and successful administrators. In March of 1830, during a still cold dawn but already touched by the first gentle breaths of the arriving spring, Eleanor went into natural labor. Charles did not leave her door for a single moment, pacing the corridor like an anxiously caged lion, whispering sincere prayers that he didn't know he possessed deep within. When the baby's first strong cry echoed through the dawning morning like angelic music, Charles collapsed into a comfortable chair, tears of overwhelming relief and complete joy running freely down his grateful face. "It's a healthy and strong boy," the experienced doctor announced with a radiant smile of satisfaction. "Perfectly healthy and remarkably vigorous." William Charles Blackwood came into the world with the potent lungs of someone who would come to be a capable future duke, but with the gentle, soft eyes he had inherited directly from his beloved mother. Charles held his precious son for the first time with carefully trembling hands, as if he feared the delicate baby might break under his overwhelmed touch. "Hello, my precious little prince," he whispered with a voice that was completely choked up. "Welcome to our loving family." Eleanor, physically exhausted but emotionally radiant, watched her husband and son with a heart that was absolutely overflowing. There was her complete and perfect family, the blessed fruit of a love that had grown magnificently from a cold matrimonial arrangement into something sacred and eternal beyond description. "He has exactly your eyes," Charles murmured tenderly, carefully bringing the baby closer to a gentle Eleanor, "and his determined temperament is already showing." She laughed when William energetically protested at being moved slightly. In that precious moment, with the golden light of the beautiful morning gracefully entering through the large windows and her son in her loving arms, Eleanor completely understood that she had found absolutely perfect happiness. From a solitary orphan to a completely fulfilled mother, from a young woman without choices to a powerful and deeply loved woman. The sacred circle was finally complete. The beautiful surprise arrived in the summer of 1831, carefully wrapped in official legal deeds and sealed with the infinite love of a devoted husband who never ceased to find creative ways to demonstrate his complete devotion. Charles had secretly bought and meticulously restored Hartwell Cottage, the precious little property in Yorkshire, where Eleanor had been born and was genuinely happy with her beloved parents during her innocent childhood. "How could you possibly have known?" she asked with grateful tears in her eyes, carefully holding the documents that made her the official owner of her cherished childhood home. "You talked about that place with such a sweet and heartfelt longing," Charles replied lovingly, gently embracing her while little William played contentedly at their feet. "I thought our growing family should have a place where it could be just a simple and happy family." The restoration had been accomplished with an absolutely loving care and attention to detail. The house completely maintained its original charm, but now had modern and convenient amenities, and in a tower specially built for her, a small observatory where Eleanor could continue her fascinating astronomical studies begun at Thornwick Hall under Charles's guidance. During the magical summer, they established a new perfectly balanced routine. Half of the precious time at magnificent Thornwick Hall, fulfilling important ducal duties, and half at intimate Hartwell Cottage, living as a simple and wonderfully happy family. There, Charles dispensed with unnecessary formal servants, Eleanor personally tended to the charming little gardens, and William grew free to explore open fields and babbling streams. "You have achieved something miraculous," Eleanor said on a perfect golden afternoon in August, watching Charles teach their 2-year-old son to carefully identify different types of flowers. "Achieved what exactly? You brought back my lost happy childhood, but this time perfectly perfected by the love of a complete and devoted family." Charles smiled warmly, kissing her softly. "And you brought me something I never knew I desperately needed." "What exactly?" "A truly genuine home. Not just a grand house or an impressive property, but a place where my heart rests completely and finds peace." In that absolutely magical summer of 1831, Eleanor discovered she was expecting another precious child. The news was received with absolutely explosive joy from Charles and solemn acceptance from William, who seriously promised to be the best big brother in the entire world. Victoria Grace Blackwood was born on a beautiful September morning in cozy Hartwell Cottage, with an experienced local midwife and an intimate atmosphere that delightfully contrasted with William's grand ducal birth. She was a girl with golden hair like ripe wheat and a sweet personality like rare wildflower honey. "Our family is now complete," Eleanor murmured peacefully, watching Charles tenderly cradle their daughter while William slept curled up against her warm leg. "More than simply complete," he agreed with conviction. "It's absolutely perfect." They established their own meaningful traditions, summers in peaceful Yorkshire, where the children learned about simplicity and connection with the land, and winters at Grand Thornwick Hall, where they received a formal education adequate to their status. Eleanor managed all the properties with a competence that surprised even the most experienced and cynical superintendents, applying knowledge acquired by carefully observing Charles and using the rights he had granted her to significantly improve the living conditions of the dependent tenants. "You have become a more competent duchess than many who were born specifically for the title," Charles commented one quiet night, watching her review financial reports with a completely natural efficiency. "I learned from the very best teacher," she replied, smiling gratefully. "And now I have my own powerful motivation. I want to leave a definitely better world for our precious children." And so the precious years passed like an absolutely golden dream, a family growing in exponential love, properties blooming under competent administration, and two hearts that had learned that true love doesn't just happen magically, but is consciously built day after day, choice after choice, gesture after gesture of mutual affection and profound respect. The letter arrived on a grey morning in 1833, bringing news that Eleanor received with a complex mix of sadness and profound relief. Lord Henry Fairfax had peacefully passed away in his sleep, officially leaving Fairfax House to her, along with a revealing personal letter that revealed completely unexpected aspects of that man she had always considered cold and heartlessly calculating. "My dear Eleanor," the letter read in the shaky calligraphy of advanced age, "I humbly ask for forgiveness for the severe emotional privations you suffered under my unwelcoming roof. The coldness you interpreted as indifference was, in fact, my profound fear of getting attached to another person destined to eventually leave. I had lost so many loved ones that I built thick walls around my damaged heart. You were courageously brave where I was shamefully cowardly. I leave Fairfax House to you not as an obligation, but as a sincere recognition that you were always stronger and wiser than I ever imagined possible. Use it as you completely desire, with my posthumous admiration and profound respect." Eleanor genuinely cried, not for the man who had died alone, but for the belated understanding that even apparently cold hearts can hide absolutely deep and unhealed wounds. "What exactly will you do with the substantial property?" Charles asked supportively, embracing her while she processed the completely unexpected inheritance. Eleanor looked thoughtfully out the window of Hartwell Cottage, contemplatively observing the landscape she had known since she was a child, but now saw with completely different and appreciative eyes. William, at 3 years old, precociously ran energetically among the flowers, pursuing butterflies with an absolutely solemn determination. Victoria, at 2 years old, slept peacefully in her maternal arms, her golden hair shining like a liquid sunbeam. A new idea began to form clearly, bright and brilliant like a nascent star with purpose. "I want to transform it into a revolutionary school," she said slowly but with growing conviction. "A school specifically for orphan girls who deserve better." Charles smiled proudly, not surprised by the natural generosity of her heart. "Tell me more details about your vision." "Not just common and traditional charity," Eleanor explained enthusiastically, becoming excited with the growing idea. "An absolutely complete education. Classical literature, practical mathematics, multiple foreign languages, natural sciences, administration, even basic elements of fascinating astronomy. I want girls like I was to have real choices that I didn't have available." During the following dedicated months, Eleanor devoted herself to the project with a passion that reminded Charles of his own passionate botanical experiments. She hired progressive and open-minded teachers, designed innovative curricula, and established a permanent fund for the long-term maintenance of the school. The Fairfax School for Young Ladies was inaugurated in the autumn of 1833, with 20 orphan girls between 12 and 18 years old. Eleanor personally attended the ceremony, passionately speaking about education as the ultimate tool for genuine freedom. "Knowledge is definitely power," she told the hopeful young faces turned toward her with attention. "And real power is genuine choice. Study well and seriously, dear girls, so that the world can never limit your dreams or potential." On that quiet night, Charles found Eleanor in the Thornwick Hall Library, carefully reviewing heartfelt thank you letters from families whose daughters had been accepted into the revolutionary school. "You have done something truly extraordinary," he said proudly, kissing her soft hair. "You transformed old personal pain into genuine hope for other generations." "I couldn't save my own lost childhood," Eleanor replied softly but with peace. "But I can absolutely save that of other vulnerable girls. That's why I love you so deeply," Charles murmured against her warm forehead. "Your beautiful heart transforms everything it touches into something infinitely better." Eleanor smiled peacefully, snuggling into his protective arms. "Our love transformed two previously solitary lives into a wonderful family. Perhaps that is our true vocation, to be instruments of positive transformation. Then let's continue courageously transforming the world. One sincere act of love at a time," Charles completely agreed, holding her as if she were the most precious treasure in the entire universe. Because that was exactly what she truly was. September of 1833 arrived magnificently laden with golden light and completely fulfilled promises. Eleanor was peacefully in the garden of Hartwell Cottage, contemplatively observing the landscape she had known since she was a child, but now saw with completely different and appreciative eyes. William, at 3 years old, precociously ran energetically among the flowers, pursuing butterflies with an absolutely solemn determination. Victoria, a precious 2-year-old, slept peacefully in her maternal arms, her golden hair shining like a liquid sunbeam. Charles approached silently, coming from the small observatory where he systematically catalogued stars that had become a fundamental part of the beloved family routine. At 49 years old, he had found a profound peace he never imagined possible, not the resignation of a man who merely accepts destiny, but the profound joy of someone who discovered that genuine love can completely rewrite any previous story. "What are you thinking about so thoughtfully?" he asked gently, sitting on the soft grass beside her, a gesture that would have absolutely scandalized the London aristocracy, but that here, in their private refuge, was perfectly natural and appropriate. "I was thinking about perfect circles," Eleanor replied thoughtfully, lovingly stroking Victoria's hair. "How life sometimes takes us exactly where we ultimately need to be, even when the path seems absolutely impossible." Charles followed her contemplative gaze, contemplating the landscape that stretched gracefully before them. From a completely lost orphan to a genuinely fulfilled duchess, from a coldly arranged marriage to an absolutely true love. And now a completely happy mother, a deeply loved wife, a woman with her own meaningful purpose, Eleanor completed with satisfaction. "Sometimes I still can't believe that all of this is completely real. It's more real than anything else in this entire world," Charles assured her firmly, taking her free hand and kissing her fingers with a reverence that remained completely intact after 5 years of blissful marriage. A soft breeze gently rustled the leaves of the trees, carrying the scent of late roses and the promise of an abundant harvest in the surrounding fields. William ran to them breathlessly, out of breath from playing so energetically and enthusiastically, threw himself into his loving father's arms. "Papa, when exactly will I be able to look at the stars in the big telescope?" he asked with a seriousness that made Eleanor smile tenderly. "When you grow a little more significantly," Charles replied patiently, smoothing his son's rebellious hair. "But I can teach you to recognize some basic constellations with the naked eye if you want to learn. I desperately want to," William exclaimed excitedly, making Victoria awaken slowly and sleepily protest at the sudden noise. Eleanor watched the precious scene. Husband and son planning future astronomical adventures, daughter waking up with small, absolutely adorable protests, and felt her heart literally overflow with overwhelming gratitude. She had learned profoundly that happiness was not a fixed destination, but a daily journey of conscious choices, constant care, and love offered and generously received. "Charles," she said softly when William ran off again to chase a particularly interesting butterfly. "Yes, my eternal love. Thank you deeply." He looked at her with gentle surprise. "Thank you for what exactly?" "For having seen me when I was completely invisible. For having loved me when I felt utterly unworthy of love. For having given me not just a comfortable home, but a devoted family. For having completely transformed my life into a story definitely worthy of being told for generations." Charles felt warm tears sting his eyes. "You did exactly the same for me, beloved Eleanor. You brought vibrant color, where there were only endless shades of gray. You brought genuine laughter, where there was only oppressive silence. You brought true love where there was only cold duty." As the sun began to set dramatically, painting the sky in rosy and golden tones that reflected magnificently on their faces, the Blackwood family remained reunited in the garden, where Eleanor had played as an innocent child, where now her own precious children grew up surrounded by absolutely unconditional love. "I think I finally understood the ultimate secret," Eleanor said, while the first stars began to appear in the gradually darkening sky. "What secret exactly? True love doesn't just happen magically once. It happens consistently every day, in every choice we make to lovingly care for one another, to patiently build together, to choose kindness, even when it would be easier to be indifferent." Charles kissed her forehead with an absolutely infinite tenderness. "Then I choose to love you again today enthusiastically, and I will choose to love you devotedly tomorrow, and every day that God allows us to have together blissfully, forever and beyond," Eleanor whispered softly, echoing the promise they had exchanged so many years before, when they were still strangers, united by convenience rather than choice. Now they were absolutely twin souls united by a daily conscious choice, a family constructed on an absolutely solid foundation of profound love, mutual respect, and complete complicity. From a cold matrimonial arrangement had been born the most true romance possible, definitively proving that sometimes destiny writes the most beautiful stories with the ink of patient trust and devoted patience. And as the stars emerged one by one in the magnificent night sky, witnessing one more blessed night of the family, who had learned to love without any limits, Eleanor understood with absolute certainty that she had found her perfect place in the vast universe, in the strong arms of the man who loved her completely, surrounded by the precious children who brought complete meaning to her existence, knowing that her love story would inspire future generations of the Blackwood family for centuries to come. The circle was absolutely complete, eternal and perfect as the constellations that shone majestically above them, blessing their love that had transcended all expectations and would endure forever.